I'm not finished, fake news.
Nope, I'm not finished either. And if you're viewing this and you haven't seen my previous video called The Guardians of War and Crime, then I suggest you watch that one first. I'm going to begin here with a fake tweet that I had rendered, and you can see by the date that I prepared it quite some time ago. However, the statement of the tweet is not fake. Magnitsky was not a lawyer. It's only fake in the sense that President Trump did not publicly say it or tweet it. Genuinely fake in that respect. But he should say it publicly and tweet it. That would start some questions. But I do wonder what the filthy fake news would say about my fake tweet. They can label it a fake tweet, but they can't dismiss it as misinformation or fake information because the statement is true. In which case they would sooner ignore it because they want everyone to continue believing their misinformation that Magnitsky was a lawyer. It's kind of a pickle for them, actually. We even have our own so-called Magnitsky Act here in Canada, and it's all just a gigantic charade presupposed by the false premise that Sergei Magnitsky was a tax lawyer for Bill Browder. Magnitsky was a swamp creature, as is Bill Browder, and Bill Browder is also a buddy of Chrystia Freeland. Imagine that. I had initially planned to expand on Freeland in a second story behind the story video, but I see no reason why I shouldn't cover it here. In short, despite the gibberish about it being about human rights, the Magnitsky Act can be described as nothing more than an elaborate asset-seizing scheme for the government. And I'm not going to spend time focusing on it. People can explore that further for themselves if they wish. But I will point out that you can see here in this typically sugar-coated propaganda-style outline that the naming of names in the asset-seizing game does not require any parliamentary vote. And you can see Freeland has her nasty teeth sunk right into it. And in most other news articles they are consistently adamant about pimping the idea that Magnitsky was a lawyer. It's a silly but consistent twist of the truth within articles that are consistently loaded with the usual brainwashing about Russia. It demonstrates that there's no limit to their mockery of the public and that they're willing to publicly create these elaborate schemes, even titling it with the very person's name, all within the context of an outright lie about that person. So you really have to wonder how a group of people can sit around a boardroom table and discuss something like this at length and avoid that context. Nobody pipes up and asks Freeland, "Hey, did you know Magnitsky was not a lawyer?" So I'm wondering why we're all sitting around and pretending as if he was a lawyer. And more importantly, how and why are we passing something into law that's woven together based on a make-believe story? If you pretend enough, it will make it true.
And I suppose if you say it loudly and over again, people will totally believe it.
It's no real surprise that Psycho Trudeau appointed Psycho Freeland as Deputy PM of our deteriorating country. This extends her reach of power beyond that of Minister of Foreign Affairs when manoeuvring around with all her slimebag buddies the likes of Bill Browder. Maybe she even helped him with his junk voucher scam way back in the good old days. Browder is a real piece of work, always stirring things up while meddling with Canadian affairs and pimping the Russian hyperbole. And when Paul Whelan hit the news, Browder was all over the internet. Do you remember when Paul and David Whelan hit the news? Another Canadian connection? And the media were all hands on deck, trying to convince everyone that there's no way Paul Whelan could be a spy. Ah yes, definitely not a spy. Nothing fishy going on. And quite far-fetched, despite his 4 passports and dubious military background, and according to the sterling investigative research of George Webb, supported by Harry the Greek at brassballs.blog, Mr. Whelan is the proprietor of 3 Class 1 weapons outlets. Class 1 arsenals can sell things like machine guns, mortars, and claymore mines, all that mellow stuff. And I have to add in here that while I was making this video, I saw that Harry reported that a weapon that was used in the 2017 Las Vegas shooting came from one of Whelan's gun stores. And I'm just quickly spinning through Harry's research here to show that he has a couple of extensive articles on the Whelan connections with supporting videos, links, and documents. And suffice it to add here, Harry at Brassballs is exceptional when it comes to providing accompanying documents. And Mr. Whelan also seems to be involved with recruiting Russian snipers, so perhaps spy isn't exactly the appropriate word here. And proudly posing as a military trophy in the Clinton Museum indicates no allegiance to any particular country, constitution, or set of rules for that matter, but rather to a filthy cabal of freaks and monsters. So in terms of semantics, I think the word spy is far too kindly. That's why everything is one gigantic contradiction when dealing with this gang. For instance, let's take Freeland's support of the illicit gun runner and juxtapose it with her tweet about illicit arms trades. We see she's cut from the same cloth as Hillary because whatever she's screaming about with grave condemnation is precisely what she'll be guilty of covering up. Just as Freeland wants you to know that the Nazis are still around, she just doesn't want you to know that she's one of them, and that the American connection has absolutely nothing to do with Trump. Notice Freeland isn't encouraging the public to do some research on Operation Paperclip to learn about what really happened to the Nazis, or what didn't happen to them, I should say. And the sad reality here is that the bio-warfare that is being deployed today is nothing but a continuation of creepy Nazi science programs. It's all such a fragmented and spattered mess on the surface, and however much the media tries to present all their news bites as isolated circumstances, they're most certainly not, because it's all connected in one way or another. To the swamp, of course. And an example like the Magnitsky Act not only shows that the media and the government lie, and lie quite openly in collaboration, but it stands in the face of this notion that is commonly entertained about conspiracies, in that there's just no way that you can get so many people to lie and conceal the truth. Really? Gee, I don't know, not so sure about that. The truth manages to hide itself because people are so ignorant. In any case, if you can get a committee of people to legislate an act that is based on a foolish lie about a person, and then get an entire government house to vote favorably for it, and then have all the media trestle that lie onward for the public to get on board.
Please don't tell me it's impossible to avoid the truth when there's many people involved.
It also shows the extent that they don't care, such that they don't even care that it's easy to prove they lie. So they openly practice slap-in-your-face lying while pretending they're wonderful.
Yuck.
Chrystia Freeland is not a wonderful person. Chrystia Freeland is swamp sewage. And we all know they aren't pushing for women to be in politics because they seek equality. They want women in politics to use them as a shield from any criticism. We see it all the time. If you say anything negative, it's not seen as an attack on the ideas, it's deemed as an attack on women. A dandy example of the hypocrisy would be this tweet here that I took a screenshot of some time ago. It's so bizarre because they practice the very thing they scream about. Unsubstantiated prejudice. Her statement is saying that truth and integrity is dictated by gender and not critical thinking and actions of choice. And it's really sickening to see the grandiose pretentiousness that always accompanies convoluted ideas and statements like this. And they're so delusional they think they're role models. But of course, even here and now, my comments won't be seen as any form of analysis, but both misogynistic and racist, when in fact it's neither. It's her idiotic statement I'm attacking. It's really easy to debunk. All we need to do is put Hillary Clinton here, and the tweet sinks into the pungent pit of irrationality whence it came. And when you really seriously consider Hillary, her conduct and character is actually among the most odious of all the swamp creatures, so spare me this idea that integrity is hinged on gender. Good grief. And so here I'm going to take this discussion and plug it into the bigger picture. And I'm going to crank the clock back and run a little clip I've had on the back burner for a long time now. When something crazier than usual happens, I will sometimes screen capture the live press conference, if I happen to be around to do so, simply because I would so often see or hear critical things that were typically eliminated in the later news hour coverage of it. So this here was a live press conference that goes way back to the Aaron Driver incident. And I apologize for some of the audio hiss. I had to do some tweaking because there was no microphone on the reporter's question. Nonetheless, the reporter asks a question about the regularity of the use of mental illness as the reason behind so many of the actions that can be seen as acts of terrorism. Now, it appears the question is initially directed at the female officer, so according to this mouthpiece, we're dealing with a straight shooter here. Because she's a woman, there will be no compromise because she's a woman, and the truth will come out because she's a woman. But what's her response? She smirks with a dirty little smile and passes the buck on to her colleague, who has lots of shiny buttons and pretty ribbons on his chest just like her. And he proceeds to spew out the usual verbal sewage about radicalization and blah blah blah.
The RCMP's been involved with Mr. Driver for a long time prior to yesterday. Many interactions with him. It seems that every time an incident like this happens or a threat of one, someone will come forward and say, well, this isn't really terrorism, really, this is mental illness. I'm wondering if you can comment on that. Specifically to Mr. Driver, would you say?
No, specifically to Mr. Driver, I can't comment on this. All I can comment on is individuals such as Mr. Driver radicalized by various means. In the case of Mr. Driver, likely the internet played a significant role in his radicalization, but again, this is speculation on my part. Clearly, he was radicalized based on ISIS propaganda, but in terms of his mental state, this is not something that, frankly, I'd be qualified to speak to.
Scum, both of them. And I don't give a damn what they've done to earn their shiny little pins and ribbons, because they're scum for being complicit in all the real ugliness in the big picture while playing along with all the fairy tales told to all the drowsy people. They're scum because they're instrumental in all the radicalized indoctrination. And the real ugliness being the fact that the vortex is opium, and most of the mass public shootings that happen, if not all, are done by goons they've either framed, manipulated, or radicalized, or just let loose from prison to do their dirty work, to eliminate those in their imperial crime ring that seem to be getting out of line, or perhaps even forgot that it's not their opium, it's the CIA's opium. The remaining peripheral casualties are just intentional collateral damage to make it look as though no one individual or group was targeted. On the other hand, they do play the game that a group was targeted to evoke the race game and the fear game and the terror game. And that's just another part of their elaborate Clockwork Orange insurgency plan. And it is elaborate, make no mistake about it. They're bold and even careless because they don't care that it's obvious. But it's elaborate, make no mistake about that. And because they manage to keep their violent mechanisms beneath a veneer, it ensures that scum like this can sit there with their spiffy uniforms and fool the gullible public into thinking they're the quintessential example of honor that can be trusted. So all the aforementioned described ugliness is hiding behind a smirk. And with all the recent ugliness going on now in the health sector of things, when I saw the ordeal about the Fauci smirk, I said, bingo, it's time to dig out the old Law and Order smirk from the archives to match it. Yes, a smirk that says we're not really that sneaky with our lies, but silly in fact. But good thing most of the populace are naive ignoramuses that believe our silly stories of bullshit. But let me pass it on to my esteemed male colleague to give you a more accurate account of the details of our bullshit, because he can cover up his moral cowardice with a much more sterner authority than I can. And I'm certainly not going to tell you the truth, because I'm a moral coward just like him. We're two peas in a pod. Besides, we would never risk our pension. Don't be silly. And if you happen to have a family member that was maimed or shot dead because they happened to have been in the wrong place at the wrong time when we needed to eliminate our snitch or one of our heroin-dealing thugs, then our thoughts and prayers will certainly go out to you. And we promise to encourage Trudeau to continue his creeping dictatorship and seize firearms he has no right to seize as a means to ensure that the innocent public really can't defend themselves against the thugs that we unleash and give the guns to do our dirty work. Anyone that's cared enough to properly evaluate the situation knows that the real problem with the police is not systemic racism, but the corruption of being complicit in a highly criminal, corrupt system. And I differ in viewpoint when I hear people say that the problem is really only situated in the high-ranking brass, like these scumbags, and all the regular rank and file are good people. While I beg to differ, because if it's just the so-called brass, then where are all the rank and file? Why are they not speaking up? Where is all that courage and bravery, especially when there's so many of them? It seems we're back to the individual again. And silence. If there's one thing people can be relied on for, it's their silence. And the larger standpoint I'm leading to here is that with recent events with this virus, we now see that both institutions of public service that are supposed to protect the public have proved themselves to be a failure in terms of having any integrity to truly serve and protect the public. In fact, they're now both proving to be not just a failure, but an outright menace to public health and welfare. That's beyond dangerous. It's criminal. Now, indeed, I have to admit that I've developed a real hatred for Hollywood and most of the people it evolves around. But do you remember the pistol shooting competition when Dirty Harry intentionally shot the target of the good guy to send a message? Well, I'd say it's pretty clear at this point that both camps now fit that category. because the rosters in both camps are clearly filled with moral cowards surrendering themselves as nothing more than theatrical props decorating the stage of a criminal playhouse. But does this all mean we defund the police and classify healthcare as redundant? Decidedly not, because it's not the fault of the system, it's the lack of integrity of the individual. And in terms of healthcare, I'm talking about healthcare as a vocation and its corresponding principles and how an individual acts in defending said principles, and not what kind of healthcare system is intended on being administered. It's the individual aspect I'm focusing on, just as the cop in the George Floyd case is an individual. But I really shouldn't use the word cop because he's not a cop, he's just a thug. And that event, just like most of the shootings, was deliberately carried out by the thug to serve this kind of purpose, to inflame everything and push the perception that he's proudly displaying here. They're both thugs, they knew each other and even worked together apparently. They're both deemed expendable, the only difference being one is being glorified as a loving martyr and the other is just another patsy. That's the systemic problem. It's not systemic racism. The systemic part is how systematic the CIA are at arranging things like that. And I say arranging because they have a long reach, and people misinterpret the connection. For instance, when I tell people that all the absurd protests, violent chaos, and rioting is all orchestrated CIA fun and games, they roll their eyes and wave their hand in dismissal with a poof, because they think I'm saying everyone in the mobs leading the charge are CIA agents that can flash some kind of special badge or ID. It's precisely the opposite. The mobs of crowds just end up being the useful idiots they manipulate by funding and orchestrating the clubs and groups they want to spearhead all the destruction and civil unrest. So don't kid yourselves, that killing was a blatant act of disposing of a guy in broad daylight because said guy likely became a problem in some way within the ginormous crime ring they run behind the curtains. Again, they're both thugs deemed as expendable to those that ultimately control them. And the act serves three purposes. 1, it sends a message to all the other thugs that they need to stay in line. 2, it eliminates the thug that apparently isn't. And 3, it promotes the image of systemic racist police abuse that they so love to use to cause civil upheaval and divide. So the true ugliness that we can call systemic is the system of the overall crime ring, and that includes the media that help hide it all and distract everyone with all their fucking bullshit. Which is precisely why I prefer to call them the criminal media rather than just fake news. Did you notice how CBC grudgingly returned to the subject of the Winnipeg BSL-4 lab and the hocus-pocus disappearances of things around there, but managed to whisper it through a news cycle of about 3 days and then it too disappeared? I noticed they were sure to add that any notions of this lab being involved with the current virus is conspiracy theory. Because after all, the RCMP have denied there's any connection. Besides, it was a different kind of virus that vanished. Ha 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 ha. Get it? See how easy it is for them to deny everything and treat it so lightly and insulting that you wouldn't want to know any of these details anyway. Boring stuff, that. Global or CTV never even went near the fiasco this time, to my knowledge. Not even to remind you to beware there's conspiracy theories lurking. People really need to get past this idea that the government would never intentionally do something to harm the public. They would because they do, because they have before. And in terms of testing bioweapons, anyone that doubts that a government would spray unsuspecting citizens with an airborne pathogen of some kind needs to examine what was called Operation Sea Spray. This guy does not care about you. This guy does not care about you. This guy here is laughing at you behind closed doors. All you people that think this guy cares about you, stop. Enough already. What will it take to get you people to open your fucking eyes to what's happening? You people may as well take that damn mask you're wearing and put it over your eyes. Especially when we see the hypocrisy. If Trudeau thinks protesting for all the social emergencies was still so important, then why wasn't he encouraging the climate crisis protests to continue? Oops, oh yeah, that would have looked bad with all you people using your single-use masks and plastic gloves raging against single-use plastics and products. Can't you just picture the sign?
Fist raised in the air. Ban single-use plastics.
Strange how those items are suddenly the cat's meow.
How dare you?
Even stranger is how this so-called health minister can go from this iron fist warning to this ridiculous standpoint. And to see Trudeau on his knees as a groveling servant to all the chaos and ugliness while breaking his own stupid rules he's enforcing on everyone else makes it feel like my brain is going to explode. And I get seriously pissed off when I'm out and about in public because I don't see anybody speaking out against it. And I'm not talking about protesting with a sign, standing with a mob. I'm talking about speaking up at the stores and banks and other places where they're playing this game of let's see how much the guinea pigs will blindly obey stupid orders. I mean calling out the managers for not pushing back on all this nonsense. Myself, I find it to be a disturbing reminder of the many shop floors I've stood on where I'm the only one speaking up. When I stand and ask the people that are obediently enduring the long social distancing lineups why nobody is angry that their own government are spoon-feeding them filthy lies while experimenting on them like guinea pigs and are therefore war criminals, they're all silent, sheepishly gazing at their stupid phones or staring at me with hatred like I'm the problem. It's so disgusting to see the human race mutating into such utter uselessness. And what really bewilders me is how they get totally offended if I happen to say the word fuck while I'm conveying my anger. You see, I don't normally curse when engaged in an open public discourse like that, but now I intentionally do because I like to trigger the reaction. Because I find it highly interesting that people don't get upset or angry that their own government are war criminals committing war crimes on their own population. But they'll get upset if I say the word fuck out loud amidst my anger about it all. Imagine that. I find that really interesting, but highly, highly disturbing. Do you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of the part right near the end of the movie Apocalypse Now, where the Colonel Kurtz character, played by Marlon Brando, is sitting among the shadows in the stone temple dictating more of his musings about the hypocrisies and horrors of the war. And he says, "We train young men to drop fire on people, but their commanders won't allow them to write fuck on their airplane because it's obscene." And in its own sad and twisted way, that's what this all reminds me of. Quite fascinating. The people don't care that their own government are complicit in spraying them with bioweapons. But don't you dare say the word fuck. It's too obscene.